What up, everybody? Welcome to the State of Wild, episode 13, a regular podcast, YouTube video, web series thing. As usual, we've got Corbett joining us tonight. Corbett, how are you, friend?
Hey, Meowth, I'm doing very well. How are you today?
Doing pretty well. It's like one of the highlights of my weekend, so I'm really excited to record.
Aw.
But the rest of you guys know the drill by now. We're planning on doing three things during today's podcast. First of all, we're going to be talking about the state of the wild metagame. So what's dominating, how to beat it, and any decks that might be flying underneath the radar. Second off, we're going to be talking about any wild news, controversial topics, or maybe the lack thereof. And last but not least, we're going to be talking about our decks of the week. All right, but before we get started, just a reminder to leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you guys enjoy content like this. It's free and it supports us a lot. But yeah, with that being said, let's get started. Alright, so for the state of the wild metagame, like we predicted last week, we've kind of seen a rise in the amount of Arena Priest. And as a result, we've seen a sort of settling of the metagame post Dark Glare nerf. So it's much less experimental rather than it was last week when we recorded. And so alongside Arena Priest, we've seen a lot of discard Warlocks, Quest Mages, Jade Druids, and Odd Rogues kind of rise to the top of the metagame, at least on the America server. And this is kind of sort of what we expected, and so nothing too crazy. So my first question to you, Corbett, is it's been a week and a half. Do you think the metagame is solved already? Do you think that this is what should be seeing play for the rest of Skullman's Academy?
No, I don't think it's solved. I think that Arena Priest, like we said, will still be the most, sort of influential dominant deck. I think Discard Warlock is another one that's very much here to stay. But I don't think it's very much solved. I think that there is kind of always something sort of hidden and different stuff that can rise up, whether it's like something like LPG Mage previously was a deck that saw very little play for a long time until all of a sudden it was like, hey, this deck is actually really, really good. So that was like a recent example. So yeah, these things always like kind of pop up, and yeah, who knows, right?
Yeah, so I feel like while the meta is still experimental, I should say, we've seen a lot of people playing the same few decks or lists in the metagame. And I don't know if you would agree with this, but it feels like a lot of people are net decking like the same person, and there's maybe that's contributing to the feel of not many people playing new lists.
Yeah, well, the thing in Wild, right, is that there's a very small number of people that can have a sort of a disproportionate influence on the meta. Now, sometimes that can be just someone that hit rank 1, they get net decked on Twitter, like that kind of stuff happens. There can also be people that happen to like tweet out a certain list, and all of a sudden you see it on HS Replay very, very quickly. So a lot of the thing in Wild is because it's so disproportionate in terms of like who is posting lists and like how much influence they have. It kind of puts a lot of weight on what they say and what they tweet out and stuff like that. So if one of the people that tends to have a greater influence doesn't just post about a list, all of a sudden it doesn't see that much play. Whereas if they decide for whatever reason to post this, then it'll see an uptick. This is very different to Standard, right? Where in Standard, there's so much information. There's like so many players. There's so much like Twitter. There's so many streams. And in Wild, it's a little bit different. So it'll be interesting to see whether there are these kind of like hidden gems and stuff, and how those are unearthed, and whether we can really discover some cool stuff moving forward.
Yeah, I feel like so what that means, I think, is there's a lot more experimentation, like room for experimentation, at least in Wild, beyond the surface of what beats Arena Priest. And yeah, it's really hard to do because deck building is hard, and there's a really high bar, I think, set when it comes to Wild, where like the power level and the synergies available in the format, you have to meet this kind of like certain threshold to be competitive. And I think a lot of that also plays into what metagames are present, right? So like in the previous metagame, when there was just Dark Lair Warlock and Arena Priest, there wasn't really much wiggle room when it came to what you could play in the metagame. But I feel like even with Arena Priest being, I feel, super dominant, I feel like there's still a lot more room for experimentation. And like every week we talk about our off meta decks of the week, but I feel like calling them off meta really isn't fair to them. It's just like our not so popular friends, playing these decks. Because I feel like these decks are ones that are potentially competitive, but just because somebody like you or Hijo didn't tweet them out, they're not seeing a ton of play. Right. And I know you don't want me to say this, but like people like you have a huge influence on the metagame. right? Because you're a really good player and you're pretty active on Twitter. And so people net deck your list whether you like it or not. And so if you're only posting like one list a week, I guess it's like that's the list we're going to be seeing a ton of for that next week, you know, whether it's like supposed to be seeing play or not.
Yeah, like I said, sometimes it doesn't have to be an individual that always has the same effect. Like, for example, Anura, like, basically seemed to single-handedly push Odd Shaman, which does actually look quite solid, like, quite competitive. I know it's kind of a meme, like Odd Shaman, but no, it looks pretty decent.
It looks like a good
deck, yeah. And like as one individual person, they kind of like push this idea and they got other people to try it and they've kind of refined it and it's popped up a lot more.
Yeah.
And not saying that Anura like invented it, but it does speak to how much influence sort of one archetype, how much influence one person can have on an archetype and whether like people pick it up. So yeah, like I said, a lot of time in Wild, it's a little bit disproportionate. So it will be interesting to see, you know, like what people have missed, basically, what I've missed, what other people have missed, and whether there are kind of these cool archetypes that can be competitive moving forward, even if they aren't the absolute best decks in the entire format.
Yeah, so basically what we're saying is feel free to keep experimenting, right? Even if you're seeing a ton of Ranger Priest and Quest Mage, like there's still stuff out there, right? Wild is never solved. It's probably never going to be solved with like the player base that we have, right? There's always going to be a best deck, but that doesn't mean there's not room for more, you know, or new competitive decks that you can climb the ladder with. And so we've talked a little bit about what we're seeing in the metagame. And so I'm just going to ask you the question of like, how do you feel about the metagame? What are your thoughts and feelings?
I feel a lot better, I think, about this metagame than I did. And maybe that's because of how we just came off like Dark Lair, which was really not that fun for me as a whole. So like the direct contrast from just going back a couple of weeks feels really refreshing. So yeah, overall, I kind of like a lot of the decks that are seeing play a little bit more. On the whole, I'm not super thrilled about Highlander. You know, it's a personal gripe I tend to have. But on the whole, I have enjoyed this quite a bit, and it seems like I've had a lot. It certainly feels like I personally have had a lot more room to play off meta stuff that we're talking about. Whereas against the Dark Lair meta, I felt very restricted. So yeah, it's been fun so far.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I feel like, I guess, instead of playing like only 2 decks, that's right. I think previously it was like Reno Priest and Dark Lair Warlock. At least now I can play like 7 or 8 decks, if not more. I think talking about tiers is like super like unproductive, but I feel like there's definitely 8 to 10 decks that are super viable right now that, while they might not be the best deck in the format, they're definitely viable. Like whenever I want to play ladder, I can choose any of these 10 decks and be like super successful, like in top 150, top 100 legends. So I don't know about you, but like I feel like when I'm personally evaluating whether I enjoy metagame, I think there's like 2 main factors that come to mind. So first of all, like how does the meta feel to play against? Right? Am I pigeonholed into just 1 or 2 decks, or do I have a variety of decks that I can pick and choose from and be successful, and like a variety of archetypes within that, right? Not just aggro or combo, but I can play whatever I want to play. And then, I mean, this one might be a little bit more controversial, but my second kind of factor is, does the meta feel like the best players are winning more often, right? Does it feel like the more skilled player will be a higher rank at the end of the day? And that kind of lends itself, I guess, to, is the meta skill intensive, right? Or is it just kind of like high roll nonsense when it came to Darkest Hour, right? Which is how I felt about that metagame, which is why I didn't enjoy it. And I know this is kind of, maybe we need to define what skill intensive means, right? If I'm saying like whether I enjoy a metagame or not. But I mean, what is skill intensive to you? It's a pretty loaded question, right? And I don't think this answer is gonna please everybody out there, but
yeah, skill intensive to me is just like, does a deck get better with better players, as in higher ranks and higher skilled players? And does a deck get better with more player experience, right? So like if I put 10 games into a deck, how does that look compared to the average deck that I have 10 games into? How does it look after 100 games? And like, how does this work for the entire population? So that's generally how I evaluate it. Now, there's like skill cap is a very complicated and often a very subjective.
Yeah, I feel like skill cap is different than skill intensive, though, right? I feel like
Yeah, like what you were saying, where you decided that you felt like the Dark Glare meta was very high rolly and stuff, yet previously you had talked about the Dark
Not
Glare
Dark Glare,
Warlock was
Darkest
tricky to
Hour.
play.
Darkest
Oh,
Hour, I
Darkest
thought
Hour,
was
sorry.
so.
What I was about to say though with Dark Glare was that even if you did feel like, hey, if I draw my Dark Glare and my Giants and I pop off, then I just win. Like the floor, it doesn't really matter like the decisions in terms of that. But you can at the same time you can say, but the deck is still kind of a little bit tricky to play in terms of making the exact correct decision at every point. And there's a lot of cards being played and stuff like that. And so that's kind of an interesting topic between floor and skill cap, like the cap and the floor. So there's kind of differences there as well.
Yeah, so I think when we talk about skill floor, I think it's talking about like the level of skill required to pilot the deck and win a game, right? I think that's just like the general definition of that. Whereas
Just the baseline.
Baseline, where skill ceiling is like, okay, while this deck might have a super low skill floor, right? Anybody can win, right? And anybody can pull off the Snip Snap combo when they have the perfect hand, right? Back when Snip Snap Warlock was a deck. But very few people, like the best Snip Snap Warlock players out there, won because of the way that they were able to pilot like the worst hands, right?
Yeah, they navigated the aggro matchups in particular really, really well for the most part.
Yeah, and so while Snip Snap Warlock might have, by definition, had a really low skill floor, I think it maybe had one of the highest skill ceilings of decks that we have seen in Wild, at least. And so I think both of those kind of factor into the skill intensive aspect of a metagame, where yeah, when I get high rolled at bronze 10 by somebody who I think very obviously, without even seeing their hand, has made a couple mistakes, can be pretty frustrating. But I think there's a difference between, okay, well, I mean, I would do the same thing, right? But also, I can probably pilot that deck better than the average Joe because I understand the intricacies and I can take advantage of that higher skill ceiling than the other player, right? I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, but
just on skill cap in general, like to me, it's a super interesting topic. I think, just because, like, there's so many different ways to sort of tackle it. And something that I will say as well is that, player experience with a deck generally trumps everything. Like the decks are generally so close. Yeah, like the decks are generally so close. Like in terms of like how like their total like average win rate, right? Like it's usually just a couple percentage points. And if someone like, you know, a famous one like Fibonacci, the Control Warrior main who has played Control Warrior for like 6 years, yeah, spoiler alert, he's going to have a high win rate with Control Warrior than almost every other archetype because he's really, really, really good at it. And so there's always like room for someone to kind of get better at an individual deck. And, you know, people often like meme about Hearthstone in terms of random and skill and stuff, but there's a reason the best players tend to win a lot more than others over the long run, because there are constantly meaningful decisions. And so that's just something I'll say on the individual deck. Something else that I would talk about is sometimes people, when talking about skill cap, people tend to, I think, misunderstand which decks are the highest skill cap. Often the decks that, for me, what I've typically seen, the highest skill cap decks are the ones that are very flexible, that have pieces that can be used either aggressively, defensively, that takes like very different play patterns. That the more times you think, wait, what's the right play here? Wait, what should I, hang on. There's 2 viable lines, there's 3 viable lines. Like what's the right decision? The more often that happens and the more like flexible a deck can be in a certain matchup and stuff, those tend to be the hardest decks. Which I think like there's a bias towards control decks typically, but I think some of the most skill intensive decks are actually the very fast kind of flexible combo decks, like decks like Snip Snap, decks like Inner Fire Priest, decks like even like something like Quest Rogue could use pieces very differently depending on the matchup, in how you complete the quest. So yeah, it's an interesting topic to me as a whole, and how the player perception can often be a little bit different than the reality of it.
I mean, I think that's a good segue to a couple points that I kind of want to make. You talked a lot about this bias towards control decks being super skill intensive, and I just kind of I want to talk a little bit about this myth that aggro decks are brain dead, aggro decks are not skillful, they don't require skill to play, you just drag stuff face. And I like heavily disagree with this fact, and every time I see it in a Twitch chat or a YouTube comment, I like cringe a little bit, because I feel like for me, aggro decks, because you make less decisions on average than a control matchup, right? Let's say I'm comparing Reno Priest to even Shaman, because aggro decks on average, maybe even Shaman's not even the right kind of comparison, but you make less decisions, and so therefore each one of your decisions matters more, right? And so I don't know, when the last Wild Open happened, F's in the chat for the Wild Open, right? But I played a ton of even Shaman that 1 month that we were trying to qualify for the Wild Open. I played close to 300, 400 games on one deck of even Shaman, and even something that seems super simple, right? There are so many intricate decision lines where it's like aggro decks are not brain dead, and there's a lot more decision points and nuance to aggressive decks than I think most people give them credit for.
Yeah, and I think it's even less about aggro versus control. It's more about the type of aggro deck, the type of control deck. There are aggro decks that are hard, there are aggro decks that are easy. There are control decks that are hard, there are control decks that are easy. And so it really just depends. And no matter what you're playing, right, as Hearthstone for the most part, there are going to be at least meaningful decisions. People are going to make mistakes. And so, you know, nobody plays perfectly all the time. So no matter what you're playing and stuff. But yeah, skill cap, as you said, you know, like there can be misunderstandings on that stuff. And I still remember you playing even Shaman in that Wild Open month where you, I remember you thinking that it was going to be like kind of easy because even Shaman had that rep. And I remember you talking about how you felt like, hang on, there's kind of a little bit more to it, which made you frustrated because sometimes you just get giga high rolled. But yeah,
I feel like there's this misconception. Another one I want to kind of touch on is this: every time a meta report comes out, right, whether it's VS or it's Tempo Storm or it's the Wild Side, every time a meta report comes out, I feel like we get a little bit of argument about, okay, well, this deck should be in this tier. And while I don't want to argue about like tier lists or anything like that, there's this common argument that decks are like, they show up with a lower win percentage because they're more skill intensive, right? And maybe that's true for like brand new archetypes that people like don't know how to play, because I think Snip's not like the very first meta report that it came out for, that it was on the VS report, rather. I think it was like tier 2, and then like
that was, sorry, just to jump in, that was mostly because of the build, not because the final refined build was actually always like the best deck in the VS report. Sorry, but yeah.
No, but it's like stuff like that where they show up lower and then people say it's because they're more skill intensive to say it. Well, like I think Warlock is a good example of that on the VS reports, where it's like, I think it's been like a tier 3, tier 4 deck for like the past 3 years. And people are like, oh, it's because Warlock's hard to play. Like, of course it's going to show up as like poor on the meta reports. And I don't know, how do you respond to that?
Yeah, I think players in general, like I'm talking about how decision making matters a lot, and it does. The thing is, like the influence that people have to flip matchups isn't as strong as people would like to think. Like bad matchups are bad matchups. Like, and I say this as someone who, you know, like I acknowledge all the time when I make mistakes. I acknowledge that I'm not nearly as good as the best players. Typically though, like if you take 2 good players and then you look at the matchup, oh, it's like unfavored. You take 2 very, very good players. It's very rare that matchups flip, and it's very rare that there's like very, very significant changes in the average win percentage, regardless of the rank bracket that you're looking at. If a deck changes in performance in matchups by just a couple percentage points, that's a really big deal.
Yeah.
And so often when decks go from like they're evaluated as like tier 4, and it's like, no, it's actually like tier 1. You just have to be a big brain like me. That was like it's a double thing, right? It's a winning argument for 2 reasons. 1, my opinion is right, you're wrong. 2, true. I'm smart, you're dumb, and that's why like it's because all the plebs on ladder don't know how to play it. And that's kind of my issue. I think sometimes when people have problems with the data-driven stuff, you know, I tend to value that stuff a lot. I know some people don't, but there's a lot to be gleaned from that kind of information, in my opinion. Even stuff on HS Replay. I know people rag on HS Replay as wild, but I think it's a super valuable resource a lot of the time, even if you don't take it as complete gospel.
Yeah, I think taking out the bias of one select person or like 5 or 10 select people and looking at, okay, well, this is a sample size of 10,000 people, right? And I think that's more representative of a power level or a the skill level of a deck, maybe.
And it's like you said about it's like I said about Fibonacci, right? Like an individual can definitely have more success with the deck over another because they're more experienced with it. But we're talking about like average for the population at a specific rank or something.
Yeah. And so let's kind of tie this back to our metagame. And so we're talking about a lot of skill. What decks would you say have been the most skill intensive in your opinion? I think we've talked a little bit about Snip Snap Warlock. I think pre-nerf Quest Mage, I think as much as I hated that deck, I think was actually much more skill intensive than people gave it credit for. I think the best players, like I think you and Jack, were so goddamn good with the deck, and when you didn't have Flamewaker, you were still winning a ton of your games, right? So, I mean, other than those two, what other decks do you think have been super skill intensive? Maybe Patron Warrior back in Standard?
Yeah, I wasn't really around in the days of Patron Warrior. So
I think you would have loved that deck.
Yeah, me too. I think I would have liked it a lot. Ungoro Freeze Mage is a famous one. That had typically had a very high skill cap. Let's see, a Miracle Rogue recently in Standard had a very high skill cap, I believe. Cyclone Mage currently in Standard has a high skill cap. Like I said, you're generally noticing a pattern of the types of decks that I'm talking about. And it is interesting. Like I said, skill cap is something that's measurable and something that leaks into often the Standard BS reports. If you guys are ever interested in that, you can often read discussion, and Zacho has talked about this kind of stuff previously about like which decks are the most skill intensive and stuff like that.
Yeah, but let's wrap it back to Wild, right? So what decks in the current metagame? Yeah. We talked a little bit about it at the very beginning of the segment. It feels like forever ago, right?
Sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine. What decks, though, do you think in the current metagame would you say are skill intensive, or at least like high skill ceiling?
I think LPG Reno Mage seems like a deck that, with the Pilgrim package, seems pretty relevant. I think Quest Mage is always one that players typically will perform better with as well. And I think as more of an off-meta thing, I'm always partial to Inner Fire Priest as an answer. I've been playing Inner Fire Priest a bit. It's got nectared a little bit. And yeah, I think that deck is always interesting in how you use your pieces and stuff and how you could set up a win condition. So yeah, I'd say those three off the top of my head.
Let's be super controversial. 2 decks. Arena Priest. Skill intensive, yeah or nay?
No. I would say Arena Priest is below average in terms of skill cap right now.
Taking shots at people. And Turtle Mage. I think a lot of people have been throwing that around recently.
My thoughts on Turtle Mage? I think Turtle Mage is like hard
skill level of Turtle Mage.
Yeah. I think Turtle Mage, I think it's tricky for new players to pick up, but I think like once you get it, you get it. But yeah, I'd say for the first I don't know, X amount of games. I don't know what the number is. But until you get used to like the hand size and managing the order of play, then it can be a little bit tough. But yeah, and I think even surviving the early game is a little difficult as well. So yeah, I'd say Turtle Mage is definitely above average in the current meta.
Cool. All right, so we talked a little bit about like skill. We kind of went a little bit off topic talking about skill ceiling and stuff like that. But I hope you guys enjoyed the conversation. Kind of just happened. but yeah, let us know your thoughts on what you think are the most skill intensive decks, or whether your favorite deck is skill intensive or not. But yeah, we will move on to part 2. All right, so here's where we usually talk about wild news or controversial topics, and a little bit like last week, there's a lack of news. Still no news on the brand new game. It's taken forever. Sad. And so just like we did last week, I think in this section we're gonna answer a couple of questions from you guys, from the YouTube comments or our Discords related to Hearthstone or not. And so if you have a question that you would like answered in future episodes, make sure you guys join the Discords or leave a comment down below the video, and maybe we'll answer it. And so this week's question actually comes from Arcyoung from my Discord. What's your favorite set from a flavor standpoint? So regardless of power level, right, or what your favorite cards were, what was your favorite set flavor-wise?
There are 2 that jump out. The first being Frozen Throne. I loved that expansion when it came out. Well, not the playing, but yes, like you said, the flavor. Yeah, when that expansion came out, it was very, very cool. As someone who I'm not that familiar with like the WoW lore and stuff.
Yeah.
And I think it did a really, really fun job of conveying all that, and all the characters were really sick, and the whole Death Knight idea and stuff was super fun. I mean, Game of Thrones was kind of at its peak of its powers at that point as well. So as a pop culture thing, the whole like Walking Dead and bringing back the so and so spoilers. But with all that stuff, I thought it was really, really fun. The second one is actually Scholarmance. I'm a huge Harry Potter fan. It's a recent set, but dude, I love this set. Like, it's so sick. I love it. It's so fun.
You stole one of my answers. I was gonna give two as well. Scholarmance Academy has been like, regardless of whether you like the cards or the decks or anything like that, like Blizzard knocked it out of the freaking park with this expansion when it comes to flavor.
I think this expansion might be the best it might be the best they've had. Like, I legit think this is one of the best
I absolutely love this expansion. It's been a blast, and the flavor, like you mentioned, I was a huge Harry Potter fan growing up as well, and so like this whole back to school sort of like Hearthstone Harry Potter crossover has been amazing. And then my other one would be actually Unguro, Journey to Unguro. Because that was like the first time we saw Quest and like elementals and everything.
And Benbroad rapping.
Benbroad rap is like the best. Oh god, I still listen to that every once in a while. But yeah, I think those are my two favorite. I absolutely loved. Honestly, I think Blizzard doesn't get enough recognition for like flavor and art and flavor text and all that other kind of crap when it comes to expansions, because people focus on the cards. But I play other card games, and like nothing compares to what Blizzard does with their expansions. It's actually just freaking amazing. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks for the question, Archeon. Yeah, and yeah, you guys let us know what your favorite flavor is. Okay, ignore the cards. Talking about flavor. But with that, we will move on to part 3. Yeah, so part 3 is where we talk about our decks of the week. So recently we've kind of gone off meta in past expansions when we're talking about our decks of the week. So today, what we have for you are 2 sort of meta decks. So decks that I think you could fairly, not easily, but confidently climb ladder once you get to know them. And then 1 off meta, or maybe we should label it less popular after our conversation today, right? But the first one we're going to talk about today is Discard Warlock. So this is a deck that I piloted to top 25 Legend on the America server. And so basically when this deck was at its peak prior to Scholarmance Academy, like Discard Warlock was like a tier 1 deck finally. And it was experimenting with Dark Lair, right, as a potential inclusion. And after the nerf to Dark Lair, while the combo version of the deck was kind of dead, I essentially saw this deck and was like, okay, this is a second and third copy of Canrathed, right? It's another mech warper for my Flame Imps and my Cobalt Librarians. And then after realizing how broken Raised Dead is, you get to just shove that in here as well. And it's just like a little baby Innervate. And it's been really, really clean. I was experimenting a little bit with Flesh Giants, but those are a little bit clunky since you don't really have all the self-damage effects that you did in Dark Lair. But I think this list is very clean. It's very, very powerful. And we were talking a little bit about it earlier. Definitely a competitor for like a tier 1 deck in the metagame.
Yeah, I was playing basically the same list. I think I just had Fist over the Fellstalkers. But yeah, basically the list looks really good in my opinion. And yeah, like you said, the Flesh Giants, I tried that as well, and I didn't love them. They felt a little bit clunky and kind of a little bit forced. So yeah, this feels super, super clean. I mean, it's strong as hell, and yeah.
Yeah, low-key, I think a lot of people talk about Voidwalkers as maybe a flex spot, but I'm like really confident that it's not. I think it's one of your best cards in the aggressive mirror matches. I think it's so good. You guys shouldn't be cutting them. Like you mentioned, I think you cut Fellstalkers for Fist. Which might be good. I haven't experimented much with Fist, but I feel like Fellstalker is like your only real flex spot when it comes to Discard Warlock. But yeah, this deck is really nutty. Raise Dead is insane. Hand Gul'dan is insane.
I think if you just want you want that quick climb to Legend, I think this is like the new go-to.
Yeah, no more Pirate Warrior, just run this deck instead. Yeah. But yeah, that's Discard Warlock. Short, simple, easy to go, easy to climb with as well, hopefully, and not too complicated to play. So let's go ahead and move on to our second list. Corbett, you want to take it away with your Turtle Mage?
Oh, I absolutely do. Turtle Mage. Dude, this deck will get you more friend requests than you know what to do with. I have loved playing Turtle Mage. And I think it's just because it's been like fresh. It's been kind of a little bit different. It's a new archetype, right? And you don't always get that in Wild, so I kind of like pounce on them when I get the chance. Okay, so Turtle Mage. Should we go through the combo, like how it works, or what do
Yeah,
you think?
for those of you guys that don't know
Okay.
it, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the way Turtle Mage works, you play Pilgrim, your 8 mana guy, and you often select Potion of Illusion to get a 1 mana copy back in your hand.
Yep.
Okay. So next turn, you play your 1 mana copy, Potion, get another one. You play it again, and you get 2 more copies. And so you just kind of keep on looping these, and you can kind of weave in some other 1 copy minions, right? So I can Cloud Prince opponent for 6 damage, add a 1 mana copy back to my hand, and just go face again for 6. And you can kind of do these little loops that kind of just lock out the opponent. Yep. You don't always have to pick Potion of Illusion, right? Because you're adding multiple copies to your hand. So you can add, so you can play Frost Nova with your Pilgrim. You can play Ice Block again with your Pilgrim. So you can have basically an infinite supply of Ice Blocks until you draw them all. So yes, this deck is once it kind of gets its claws into the end game, it's basically really impossible to stop. It's very uninteractive. So it's a great finisher for like decks that kind of don't pressure it enough. And now with this particular build, it looks a lot different than what you might have seen on ladder. It's running a very different set of cards compared to things like Doomsayer and Depth Charge, which are more popular. It's a lot more closer to the standard build, which is much more tempo focused. So things like Firebrand, One Thief, what's it called, One Maker. You're paying a whole bunch of cheap stuff to fight for board in the early game, and then you're just trying to like basically playing mid-range mage until you get to your end game and you win on turn 8. So that's it.
Yeah, this deck reminded me a lot of like Shutterwalk Shaman back in standard, because Shutterwalk Shaman didn't have Dirty Rat in that metagame, right? So there was no way to disrupt it once they like started chaining the Shutterwalks. You were like done for. There was no way you could interrupt it, and that's kind of how this deck feels. Except this deck feels a lot more degenerate because you have Ice Block, right? Like you can't kill him like you could kill Shutterwalk Shaman. And so I've played a little bit about of this deck. I was going to talk about, like, you play a much different early game than I think the like Concerned Mom list that we featured a couple episodes ago, right? That was all about, all right, we're playing Freeze Mage, and then instead of killing you with Fireballs, we're killing you with Pilgrims and Meteorologist, right?
Yeah.
So speaking of Meteorologist, like, is there a specific reason that you're running Cloud Princess over Meteorologist? Because I know Meteorologist, I think, can be a lot more damage and can be a board clear as well, right? Do you have a preference?
Yeah, so Meteorologist is just like so much clunkier on the non-combo turns. It often with this kind of list, you're only having maybe like 4 to 5 cards in hand around turn 6. So it's kind of unplayable, right? 6 mana 3/3 deal like a couple pings to everything. That's really shitty compared to something like Cloud Prince, which is, you guys have played enough Secret Mage. You know how annoying Cloud Prince can be. It's very, very high tempo. And so that's kind of just fits into what the rest of the list is, right? It's all tempo. It's all fighting for board. I think players in general in Wild, my personal preference is almost always to look for tempo like plays, actually be active in fighting for board control, be aggressive and stuff like that. Even if you are playing a slower archetype. And this has been true for priest lists like in the past, where I've often wanted the dragon package, it felt like, or I just want more early game, or stuff like that. So yeah, it's a real pattern. In just trying to like once you get to your combo, right, you're winning. It doesn't matter if you have Cloud Prince or not. Once you get there, you're fine. So it's all about really survival and forcing the opponent to be a little bit more reactive. I think a list like this, for example, is going to have a really nice time against something like I think Quest Mage, and really denying chip damage is a big deal in that matchup, for example.
Yeah. So this deck, I think it's very fun to play because it's brand new, but I feel like if this invades ladder, I'm going to be very, 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 very sad because
standard players are already demanding nerfs.
Yeah, I don't think it's at that point in Wild, but it can be like if you're in a like any sort of slow deck and you can't kill them or disrupt their combo, then like you have no chance at winning, right? Like if you're Arena Priest and you haven't killed them on turn 8, turn 9, you're probably losing the game, right? It's kind of frustrating, but I will say, it being a brand new deck, it's a very unique play pattern, I think, compared to a lot of other things we've had in Wild, like maybe Shutterwalk Shaman back like at the very beginning days of WoW when it was running like Corpse Taker and stuff, but yeah, it's a very unique deck, and I'm, first of all, like, I'm kind of excited because it's new, but also I'm also very, very scared. So now moving on to our third deck of the list. I want to preface this deck by playing you a little bit of footage from a couple episodes ago when Corbett said that Totem Goliath, Totem Daddy, probably still won't see play and won't be good.
Yeah, I think this is I think like the fact that it's a death rattle means it's just so slow. So for wild, I don't think this would see play maybe at 4 mana.
Okay.
I don't remember saying that.
And so he said this, yes, he said this, and now has proceeded. I think him and I have both messed around with versions of this list. Totem Shaman, like not even Shaman, Totem Shaman, with Totem Goliath, Totem Daddy being one of the best cards in that deck. And so I've been playing a little bit more of a, like, I'm not running the Amalgam stuff, which is, yes, it's a totem. I got Hunger Crabbed from a Zeph once on my Nightmare Amalgam, and I cut it from the list. So I'm running a little bit of a different package. But yeah, you want to walk people through this and kind of, like, what does this deck do differently than even Shaman?
This deck can, like, what does it do differently? So it gets to access to some really, really powerful cards, right? Like, it has Bloodlust. Even Shaman would give up everything it has for a copy of Bloodlust, I think.
That costs
it can play Totemic Reflection, right? Like a bonkers card with something like Totem Golem. And you have, like other really efficient cards like Storm's Wraith or even the Pirate package or, even Tunnel Trog. So you get these really cool stuff, right? And then Totem Goliath, kind of an important one, where you're playing, like, it's a similar flavor to even Shaman, right? Like, it feels, there's in both decks you're developing totems, but you do get access to a whole bunch of really cool stuff. And yeah, like the Polkelt is, I think, one of the more interesting inclusions, and I think it's really, really sick in this list. Polkelt just keeps finding ways to sneak into archetypes. But yeah, I think Totem Shaman is something that's kind of been kind of like bubbling at the surface, right? Like, it has had some really interesting and powerful cards. Like Totemic Reflection is busted, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
But with things like Tour Guide, I think it's like this picked up a little bit with a point now where this felt okay. Like, I played this on ladder for a little bit and I felt pretty okay into this with this, as long as you weren't, queuing into Reno Priest.
Yeah, I was about to say, I went 7-5 with a similar list in top 100 Legends. So, like, the deck is, like, it's legit. Right? Like, this is not a meme. This is a competitive deck. Do I think it's better than, like, even Shaman or Odd Shaman? No, but it also is, like, a completely different deck that probably still has a ton of refinement that needs to happen. But it's a ton of fun to play, right? We were talking about Turtle Mage being kind of a fun deck because it's, like, a brand new archetype. This is, like, a deck that, I mean, while we've had shades of, like, the Totem package in even Shaman, I think this plays a lot differently than even Shaman, in my opinion. Like, yeah, you can still do the stupid, like, Splitting Axe, Totemic Search, Totemic Might stuff, but it's a really fun deck to play as well, I think, which is maybe more important.
It felt to me like kind of a cross between, like, even Shaman and Aggro Druid. I don't know about that comparison, but it's kind of like a midpoint.
You need the board, right? Absolutely.
Yeah. And it feels a lot more like the old the old standard token Shaman. Some of you guys might remember that as far back as Ungoro. That was a really good deck, like back in the day. So yeah, I don't know. It's been refreshing, I think.
It's been a lot of fun to play. So we definitely check. It's been a ton of fun to play. So we highly recommend you guys check this out. This is the less popular version that, whatever. It's the off meta deck that we've been playing for this, at least this week. And I'll put my version down in the description if you guys want to check out my version. I'm running a little bit more of a Mimi version, running Trick Totems as well, because it's me and I have to, even though they're probably almost definitely not good. But yeah, Totem Shaman, it's been a ton of fun to play. All right, so that's going to be it for us today, though, guys. We'll be doing these episodes every Sunday with news and decks every week. And just a reminder that we're on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all these podcast listening services out there. So if you guys want to listen to us on the go, make sure you guys check us out there. And Corbett, thank you again for joining me. Let the people know where they can find you.
Guys, you can find me at CorbettGames on Twitch, Twitter, and all that good stuff. So yeah, streaming pretty much every day. So yeah, feel free to swing by and stuff. It's fun.
And guys, I think I may or may not have convinced him to upload another YouTube video instead of waiting like 2 months between them. So make sure you guys check out his YouTube channel as well. He's an awesome person.
I forgot about that one. Yeah.
But yeah, we appreciate you guys watching. We hope you all enjoyed. Stay safe out there, and we will see you guys next week. Later.
Bye, guys.